Hello, I am Mantastic and Fantastic, and today I'm coming to you with an updated legendary tier list for Creature Quest. So, there has been a lot of changes over the past 2 months in terms of the dungeon challenge structure. Most notably was the death of the stun meta, because you now can no longer have those empty waves and then filling the dungeon with creatures that are just going to chain stun you into oblivion. Furthermore, there has been changes to the color potency of color counters. So basically, if you're a red creature, you're very unlikely to actually land a debuff against something blue, but you also will be quite resilient against green debuffs for that red creature at the same time. So this does shake up a certain few things, especially from a boss defender point of view, because it favors black and white creatures a little more favorably because they don't have any weakness, so to speak. And it will make a lot of those four other colors a little weaker, just because they do get countered very hard by their color counter, because it's even more devastating than it was beforehand. So with all this in mind, the game has somewhat refocused itself into a more of a nuke-oriented strategy, where the defenders will try and populate as powerful of a floor one as possible in order to remove key targets right away. So the biggest key target people want to remove nowadays is Astral Watcher, because Astral Watcher is the only legendary creature who can resurrect dead party members. And if he is dead, a lot of their strategy kind of revolves on him being basically resurrecting everyone back up into place. And if he's dead, that can't occur, and then they have a crippled team. And if they're facing a strong and challenging boss, you are going to have a great old time defending. You might actually pull off a victory. Now, because the stun meta has been somewhat neutered in that you cannot chain stun things into oblivion, it did have the unfortunate side effect of hampering various stun heavy bosses, which will be somewhat explained further down below. Now, as I already mentioned, Dungeon 2.0 has introduced the notion that you can have stun and silence immune bosses for the first turn. However, this is actually not played out whatsoever. Initially, when it was announced, I was really excited, because I was thinking, oh, everyone's going to have this. Dungeon bosses are going to be super great and powerful. But no, the top ranking players maybe have, well, one for sure, maybe two, very unlikely to have 3 dungeons filled out, because the bonuses are just not worth stretching your resources so thin. I feel that top players could definitely fill out 2 very 4-dot heavy dungeons, but 3 is going to be a big challenge, because not all 4 dots are created equal. Some are just poor cards overall. So because of that, no one's actually utilizing the stun and silence immune bosses, and because of that, a lot of the cards have been demoted and adjusted accordingly. Most notably, the fact that debuffs from your offensive point of view are not as powerful as they used to be, because we only need to deal with floor 1. If you can pass floor 1, you usually pass the dungeon. So, in addition to that, enchants have now come out since the last tier list, and enchants does add a certain level of customization, but there are going to be, to a certain extent, kind of min-maxing, so to speak, in terms of what's the best enchant to give your creature. And because of all that, it's going to be hard to say what is the best one. I'm actually working on my enchanting guide, and that will be posted shortly, hopefully in the next couple of days, to give you an idea of what is viable for yourself. But for the most part, we're just going to assume that every creature has the optimal enchants, or no enchant whatsoever to speak. We'll just go with optimal enchants, so it's more of a level playing field. And for Kingdom Shrines, we're just going to assume everything has the same amount of Kingdom Shrine buffs, just to keep everything on a level playing field. Furthermore, all creatures are being assumed to have equal number of combo dots, as well as fully awoken and leveled and totemed. However, because of the scarcity of 4-dot legendary creatures, it is more likely that you're going to have mostly 3 dots and the rare chance of having something 4-dot. If something is 4-dot and everything else is 3-dot, they're just going to be a little bit stronger. So they may be a little more higher ranked just because you have 4 dots versus 3. So the new criteria for offense. So basically, successful offensive teams are now built around funneling mana into one particular card, and that one particular card either can instantly destroy one defending creature, or you combo them up with either 4 times or 8 times for a very suitable AoE, which I will describe what constitutes as a suitable or powerful AoE ability. And this will allow you to basically either pick off one creature at a time or wipe out multiple creatures all at once. And that is the key to success, because you want to remove as many defenders as possible, ideally the threatening ones. So, from this team I have here, this is the team I've been using for quite some time, and as you can notice here, I have lots of red dots, and surprise, surprise, they're all funneling into my Phoenix. And my Phoenix will then be able to cast a special every single turn and remove 1 threat all the time. Furthermore, Phoenix will obviously heal itself, so it becomes very difficult for him to actually die, and I've actually got a very sexy enchant on my Phoenix, which I'll show in my enchanting guide, but little spoiler, he has regen all on death blow. So when something dies to the burn, he actually heals the whole team. So it's kind of cool. I'll explain more in the enchanting guide how you can get these really sexy options out there. But for the most part, this is the general strategy you want to utilize for creating a strong dungeon offense team. And I do have a very informative video of how you can build a team more effectively. Like, I can show you examples of what makes a good offensive creature and what makes a bad offensive creature for AoE. Because in AoE, you want to have cards that do area of effect damage, so hitting multiple targets that will actually kill several ones if you do 4 or 8 times combo. You don't want to have the primary target being killed and splashing and not killing off the outside ones, because you basically spent all that effort and you only killed one thing. If you kill 3 things, that is fine. So in my example video here, we're not going to watch it now, but my Minotaur Squire, if he's fully awoken, cleaves everything for the same amount of damage. So he'll wipe out the entire row. If he's not awoken, he only hits the one target and then half for the sides, and the sides won't die. So that's kind of idea you want to have in the back of your mind as to what you want to have for your AoE. You want something that does full damage to every single target, so you're able to remove ideally 3 targets at once, because if you're funneling mana into that creature and then you combo them up, they won't have mana to actually cast a special on their next round. But if you're facing half the dungeon compared to like all 6, your life is a little easier. Pure damage is less powerful unless it is incredibly high, because before Shrines and Kingdoms came out, you actually had quite a few creatures that could one-shot various dungeon defenders with just a special, no combo required. And that list has now been shrunken down to really, I think, Lich and Megalodon who can really truly do that, with Lich being the big exception, but Megalodon as well, because there's lots of fire defenders. And the thing is, with those cards, if you are able to somehow get them all one monocolor for their combo dots, you can make them 2 times, so they funnel mana into someone else. They have 2 times, but when they kill something, they gain mana back from the death blow. And because of that, you can keep spamming and repeating that cycle. Funnel mana into a new card, use that Lich and Megalodon, gain the mana back. That sort of idea. But otherwise, single target is a little lackluster unless it's providing extra value to yourself overall. And last but not least, creatures need to survive. If your creature does not survive, well, it's not going to do any good when it's dead. So, here are the changes that have been made for the offensive tier list. So, Colossus Prime, or Miley Cyrus, because they have Wrecking Ball, moves up from A to S. And this is because, I'll just explain all the changes in a moment, but I'm just going to go over them very quickly. Ancient Blue Dragon goes from B to A. Jabberwock Frost Giant's demoted down to A. I have a lot of shifting into B. Basically, a lot of cards that were A get demoted down because they just don't work as well, because the whole idea of debuffing doesn't work. They may just drop further down. And some other cards move up because of various buffs and or changes to the criteria for AoE being powerful. We have the Gilfiend debuting at C, which is sad. Some cards being and then a few other cards just being readjusted accordingly because they're just not as strong as they used to be. So Colossus Prime goes from A to S, and this is one of the biggest changes because initially Colossus Prime was very poor in terms of a dungeon offensive card, because it's just AoE oriented and it wasn't necessary. Like, those single target things could remove threats instantly. You don't have to take the gamble, because you are taking a sort of a gamble when you ever combo someone up. Say you need 8 times damage, and 8 times with Colossus will one-shot everything. But let's say you need to get it 8 times. That means you have to use Colossus first and everyone else once, and then you have to use 3 other people and then Colossus after 8 times to swipe everything out. Because of that, you're basically using Colossus on your 9th action. And in those 9 actions, someone could have died, someone could have got stunned, and therefore Colossus doesn't actually produce his combo and thus kill people. However, because Colossus has the most damaging AoE ability in the game, he needs to be an S rank. And it also kind of solidifies the notion that white creatures, like aka Cloud Giant, Astral, Oathkeeper, and Colossus, are top tier, kind of signals that white is in a very good place overall at this point in time. Ancient Blue Dragon goes from B to A, mostly because before I demoted him down because stunning wasn't so great, but Ancient Blue Dragon is special. He does AoE stun, and he will instantly obliterate anything red, because all of those awakenings that I thought were wasted are now useful, because red creatures are very common dungeon defenders with Barbarians and Wyverns, so Ancient Blue Dragon, kapowie, moves up because of that. You can, similar idea, you can combo him up, he can obliterate everything red, stun the whole dungeon defense. Jabberwock and Frost Giant drop down because Frost Giant used to be better when there was lots of AoE-oriented defensive creatures. But because they're now single target, he's not going to be able to counter stun that often, so that loses some value there. He's pure single target, but not enough damage and no mana regeneration on any death blow to really keep funneling mana into him effectively. Jabberwock also goes down because his debuffing nature, while technically the best if we have stun and silence immune bosses, is lackluster at the moment because his AoE is a very scaling down chain damage. It doesn't do very much. It goes down very quickly to the point where you won't kill very many opposing defenders. Minotaur, Squire, Archmage, and Medusa all go from C to B. I'm moving them up slowly just to see how they feel, because Minotaur, Squire, like my video above, can cleave and kill off an entire row. So he might actually go up even further because he does gain healing for himself, which is useful. He does get a little tankier, and he will have enough damage to clean an entire row with 8 times. So that is promising. Archmage has a very powerful AoE. Yes, it does scale down, but his power value is the highest in the game, basically. So he's going to be hopefully wiping out several creatures. But the main idea is when he's fully awoken, he gains the ability to restore mana to his teammates. And I need more testing to be done, but if I'm not mistaken, each hit will restore 10 mana to every ally. And his chain will always complete if at least 2 things are alive. So you could be potentially donating like 50 mana out to your entire team. So that's important because you can wipe out several defenders and give everyone enough mana to hopefully cast more specials. So it's kind of feeding into itself why it's so powerful. And last but not least, Medusa has a mass AoE stun. She only picks off 1 target, but maybe with all that stunning it can work out. But then the problem is with Medusa, she's so squishy and soft, and she gets kind of caught up in the whole green or forest giant collateral damage, so to speak, because there's a lot of very powerful red defenders who will basically one-shot Medusa, which is kind of unfortunate just because Forest Keeper is the popular option for green. Eifert goes from C to B, and they basically just received various other buffs to make them stronger, so they need to move up, and they're more in line with the other genies at this point in time. Archdevil, Succubus, Chimera, Sledgehawk, Abomination, and Sandworm all get demoted down. They're just not as viable, and they don't fit the criteria as well. The debuffing doesn't work. Sandworm's very flimsy. Abomination's cool and all, but again, 1 single target and a lackluster counterattack is not justifiable for A. Now, Vampire is lumped in also for A to B, but I want to pay homage to why Vampire is falling down. Because Vampire used to be S ranked, and is actually one of the characters I built the entire team around for one of my accounts. And that's because Vampire, before Kingdom existed, could one-shot and kill any medium or small creature, as well as the large light elemental or white elemental that was found in floor 1s of the old 3-wave setup. And that was important because you basically funnel mana into Vampire, and then he starts one-shotting everyone, and not only does he one-shot them, he basically heals himself to full and heals adjacent allies at the same time. So this is incredible. But the problem is Kingdoms and the HP shrines outpace the power you gain from your color shrines. So Vampire is no longer able to one-shot a medium, and he may not even one-shot some smalls anymore. So he just lost so much of that nuking value potential that it's just not worth using him. Maybe if we somehow get a lot of sexy golden chance where you get a bazillion power, maybe it could work out. But I really don't think it's going to be enough overall for the most part. So this is why Vampire has been dropping down steadily. Like, he's still reasonable, but he's no longer the star of the team. And the other account that I use Vampire on, it's starting to feel a little lackluster because now I'm struggling a little bit more to really capitalize on my offensive team. Spider Empress, Titan Blade Master, and Hydra all go from B to C. They're just lackluster by comparison. The debuffing doesn't work so well. Titan and Hydra are both random target in nature. Yes, they hit very hard on one target, but the focus is on floor 1. And Pyrosaur and Pyromancer go down from C to D because their special is either very weak or random target in nature, and it just doesn't work out. Now, Gilfiend debuts at C, and the mana drain is cool, but on offense is not very effective because it doesn't actually delay the enemy's special or cancel it out, which you'd think it would because they need mana to cast specials, and draining it away should technically do that. But it doesn't work out in practice, so it's just a bit higher than average row damage, but he's very flimsy and squishy, and that's the problem for them overall. Like, it's a bit better than average, not that great. So I've changed the criteria, hence this crossing out, just to get an idea. And at this point in time, no one can feasibly fill out 5 dungeons. So basically all those points I'm just skipping over are kind of irrelevant. And it's now all about focusing on floor 1 being very powerful and effective for clearing out dangerous encounters. Now, just bear in mind that if you have a 4-dot of a creature, it's going to be a lot stronger than something that's 3-dot. And the fact that color counters exist even stronger now means that white and black creatures are a little stronger overall for the most part. So with that in mind, Stun was king. Stun is still useful, but you can't chain stun things into oblivion, which was the big selling point of Ancient Blue Dragon, Thunder Giant, and Sandworm. However, color counters are more meaningful. So like I mentioned, white and black creatures are not affected, but basically red bosses are going to struggle against anything blue because they're going to miss their debuffs most of the time. They take extra damage, do less damage. It's just going to be a problematic scenario overall. And it's going to lead to challenging times where certain color bosses just get completely neutered by a color counter that can solo them. It's kind of like the whole idea of rock paper scissors, so everything is a counter, but it makes these bosses a lot more weaker and susceptible to being soloed by their color counter. Now, there hasn't been too many changes, but I basically just moved up Thunder Giant and Ancient Blue Dragon from B to A. Mostly because I undervalued their stun nerf beforehand, and I feel like they're a lot stronger than they are because they do actually pretty high values amounts of damage. And Blue Dragon is actually a counter to Phoenix, and Phoenix is used on every single top tier player's team, so it's good to have a direct counter to what would be their shining star creature. Gilfiend debuts at A, mostly because their row attack is definitely quite damaging, but the mana drain is actually more dangerous from a dungeon defender point of view, because unless you have at least 2 ability charges ready, you will have actually no mana to cast because he'll drain it out from you because he drains 50%. So that's actually going to allow him to be quite formidable as a dungeon defender. But the problem is he's very flimsy, and stun and silence immune doesn't exist at this point in time. Now, I want to explain why Sandworm stays at C, and Sandworm used to be one of the best dungeon defenders in the game because he could chain stun. His damage was average to low, but the fact that he stuns the whole row and basically stuns them for quite a long period of time means that he can keep stunning and stunning and stunning, and everything dies, and he death blow heal. And that was great when the stun actually worked, but now we can't chain stun. So Sandworm is now incredibly squishy, and the fact that green attackers basically completely counter him anyways, he just lost all of his value. And I really regret if you heavily invested into Sandworm, because now you just basically invested in a creature that's very lackluster. He's on the decline in offense, he's terrible in defense now, so it's really unfortunate. Now, last but not least, I want to address why Phoenix is S tier and possibly, if not, the best dungeon defender in the game. Now, before everyone jumps up saying, Cleanse counters him, well, every boss has a counter. I'm well aware of that. And the idea is, how good can he function against, say, 100 different teams? Most teams can't bring a cleanse very easily because the 2 legendary cleansers that come to mind are Kieran and Druid, and both of those are color competed by Astral Watcher and Green Giant, and both Astral Watcher and Green Giant are tankier than Kieran and Druid, so Kieran and Druid will tend to get eaten up by those color counters from dungeon defenders, so it's harder to bring that cleanse. Siren is an epic that's farmable but gets obliterated basically by most defenders because she's actually very fragile. So Phoenix is quite safe in those regards because the cleanse has been neutralized. Now, I'm very well aware that blue creatures obviously counter, but that's the same with any color creature in the game. So basically, Phoenix is used by every single top player as their dungeon boss because he is the hardest boss to solo. Unless you're blue, you can't solo Phoenix. No one can really solo Phoenix because it's going to keep healing itself and it's going to be a horrible grind for the most part. And then he'll just burn you out and kill you. Because amusingly enough, offensive Phoenix solos every boss that is not a blue one, but he cannot solo a Phoenix. An attacking Phoenix cannot solo a defending Phoenix unless you have RNGesus blessing you with like holy magic. Unless you get super lucky, resist every one of their debuffs, which won't happen, and they somehow land every debuff. It's not going to happen. So that's why Phoenix is chosen, because if you enter Phoenix's float of a crippled team, you may just lose, just because you may not be able to land those debuffs. He's going to keep burning you to oblivion, and it's just going to potentially wipe your party. Now, again, like I said, the focus is not necessarily on dungeon bosses, but more so on floor 1s. But having arguably the best boss in the game as your final floor does make a significant difference. I do have a video on how to build a strong dungeon defense from especially a floor 1 point of view, which you can take a look on my website or YouTube channel as well. So, in conclusion, this month's tier list has been very heavily influenced by the focus being shifted into powerful floor 1s. Now, because of this, a lot of cards have been demoted that were kind of used to kind of counter out strong bosses that would have been silence or stun immune. So let me know what you think about this tier list in the comments below. Do you agree with the rankings of various creatures, or do you think something should be ranked higher or lower? Hopefully you all have a mantastic day, and happy questing.